Hi, Amy Shaw here. It's October 29th, 2016. Halloween's just around the corner, so it's always that interesting time of year for those of you that honor Samhain. Many Samhain blessings to you for this season. Dia de los Muertos, they're having a celebration here in the greater Austin area today. I'm going to be going to that a little bit later. So today what I want to talk about is what we would call transgenderism, or what they would call in the Native American indigenous cultures, the two-spirited people. There's some fundamental differences between our sort of post-industrial nuclear family culture and the indigenous Native American tribal cultures in how they view gender roles and most especially transgenderism. While in our post-industrial culture, we've come a little bit down that road in accepting and understanding transgenderism, we still have a really long way to go, and we have a pretty recent history of not being so kind, accepting, and even being violent towards transgendered individuals. Why this is important is because although transgenderism isn't something that's new, as I said, it's been around for thousands and thousands of years. There's over 155 Native American tribes that have a word or a historical evidence of having transgendered individuals amongst them in the tribe. And of course, those are all different languages. You know, each tribe has a slightly different language, but out of those more than 155 tribes, the translation of the word or concept that they have in their language for transgenderism translates best into English as two-spirit. So we would just call them from this point the two-spirited people. And, you know, language is a funny thing. It dictates culture. It's tied to culture. And how I think that it's important to understand the language differences between our post-industrial nuclear family sort of culture that calls it transgenderism versus, you know, the indigenous Native American culture that better translates it as the two-spirited people. So, in other words, in Native culture, what they believed was that individuals that were born in a what we would call transgendered state actually had two spirits. They had the ability to be male and female, and those people were actually treasured. They were valued. They were sort of even elevated above normal people, people that were just one gender. Now, another distinction between Native American culture and our current post-industrial culture is that gender roles themselves were not quite as rigid, and they weren't determined so early on in life. So as a child was growing up, they had a much longer period of time within which to identify with one gender or another. And the gender role identification wasn't necessarily tied to the sex, you know, the biological sex characteristics of the person's body. So they had a much looser sort of interpretation of gender and acceptance of gender. So when somebody actually was able to have two genders or two spirits, I mean, that was just, wow, that was an amazing situation. And those people were actually valued instead of looked at like they were freakish, or they weren't necessarily forced to choose one gender or another. They could actually, in a very fluid sense, be and embody both. And that was celebrated and appreciated. Now, in terms of shamanism and a shamanic view, I'm really limited in my experience with transgendered individuals. So obviously, I, am definitely not a plethora of wisdom and knowledge on that experience. And I can only talk about the limited experience that I have had, which I will share with you. So the first story I want to tell takes me back to the time when I was a social worker, a foster care social worker, and I had a pre-pubescent boy on my caseload who had some mental health issues, and it was decided that he needed mental health treatment. So he went to a children's county mental health clinic. This was in California. And the therapist that he was assigned to was actually a transgendered woman, but she was 6'2", probably nearly 300 pounds, close to it, big man hands, big deep man's voice, Adam's apple, the whole thing. She was obviously a man dressed as a woman. I don't know what her personal story was, if she was in the process of transitioning, if she wasn't able to get access to the hormones. I don't really know. This was in the early 2000s. But, having this prepubescent boy get assigned to this counselor, this big, basically burly man wearing a dress, it was almost traumatizing. And that child came to me and was like, and the foster parents came to me and were like, yeah. And so it put me in an awkward position because obviously that individual has a right to be a marriage and family counselor, has a right to be a child counselor, but didn't seem to me, in my estimation, have much insight or discernment about what would be appropriate in terms of the age and types of people that she was working with. So unfortunately, I had to go to the supervisor and ask if my client could be reassigned to a different therapist because it became evident really early on that that was not the most appropriate match for this particular client. Another thing that I want to talk about is about a year ago, some close friends had a very serious situation with their close family member where a 1-month-old infant became gravely ill pretty suddenly. And so I agreed to do some distance healing work. Well, I have a real passion for midwifery. It's just something that I've been interested in since the 80s. My second child, my daughter, was born with a midwife, and there's something about laboring, birthing women that resonates with me, and I appreciate it and value it on multiple levels. In fact, I studied for a time with Ancient Art Midwifery Institute, but I wasn't actually able to finish out that to become a practicing midwife because it was difficult at that time for me where I was living at to secure an appropriate apprenticeship. And that's a huge piece of being a midwife is the hands-on learning with another experienced midwife. Unfortunately, that's kind of been a dying art. And it shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be. So I've been advocating for women and their right to give birth the way that they choose in very natural and uninterrupted, uninhibited birth processes since the 80s. And I think because of that, because I've been around so that circle and my heart is in that space, my head is in that space, I understand birth not only physiologically but spiritually as well. And so you have what people call mediums, who are people that intercede between the living and deceased. And so in shamanic practice, we would call this psychopomp work. But one of the things that I have found is that while I can do that work and have done that work, what really, really readily comes to me, and again, I think it's because of my background in midwifery, my interest, my openness. One of the experiences that I've had is that the incoming souls, not just the departed souls, the incoming souls really like to talk to me, and I can hear them very clearly. So that's just something that it happens. So I went in to do some distance healing on this 1-month-old infant. And right away, the soul stepped forward and started talking to me. And it was a little boy, a 1-month-old little boy. But the soul was upset, angry, confused, and felt betrayed. And because she thought she was going to be coming in as a girl. And when she realized this isn't a girl and this isn't a girl body, she was not happy. She felt angry and betrayed. And there was some other aspects to it too that lent itself to the feeling betrayed part. So there was a little bit of negotiation, and ultimately this soul understood that if she fully inhabited the body and agreed to do that, that she could facilitate the physical healing for survival. So it really was at a juncture point, and she, because of that, the gender confusion, and also, some other things that I don't really want to mention that led to that sense of betrayal, she ultimately decided, no, that wasn't what I came down here for. It's not what I signed up for. And so that baby unfortunately passed away. Now, one of the things that I learned about that, because prior to having this direct experience, and whether you believe that I had that experience or believe whatever you want to believe about it is your business. I know for myself it was a direct experience. I believe it to be true, and I learned something from it. Prior to this happening, I was under this belief that all souls had a conscious knowing, and that they were coming in basically knowing what they were signing up for. So in full awareness and agreement. So this is the first time I've actually encountered a situation where that wasn't the case, where this soul was upset and felt betrayed and tricked because thought they were coming into one situation and the situation was totally different. So curious, interesting. It kind of took that belief that I had held and turned it on its head a little bit. Now, before I go on to tell you my next brief experience with transgenderism, I just want to take a quick little break to mention that while I'm telling you this story very publicly, when I was approached and I became aware of the situation, it was initially to do distance healing work, which I did. In that process, a soul stepped forward and I had an interaction. I was not asked to do soul midwifery, to do psychopomp work, and sometimes this comes up and it does happen. Even, going the other way, if you're asked to do some type of healing or ritual for somebody and they end up departing, it may kind of put you in the role of doing psychopomp work, even though that's not initially what you were called or asked to do. When that kind of stuff happens, to me, I feel like there's obviously ethical obligations. I'm not going to run to those parents and say, oh, your baby's going to die because, the soul came to me and told me that it didn't want to be here anyway. Of course, there's an ethical boundary, and, we have to filter the information in a way that is respectful of the spirits and also of the people that we're working with. That definitely sometimes information comes through and it's more symbolic, and so you'll see things and you don't always know the meaning. And this is why it's so important to be hollow bone, because if you drag this back through and you ascribe your own interpretation, your own meaning to it, and then you hand that on to somebody else, you could actually inadvertently be cursing them and not even really have intention to do that, but you're doing that because you're passing on. And so when you get information that's in a symbolic form, sometimes you're not given to share that at all. Depends on what the information is. You have to really screen it, filter it. But sometimes, it will be something you're just going to pass on. Well, here's what I saw, and allow that interpretation to come through that person. So they get to decide, in their power, what the meaning or significance is, if there is any. But sometimes when it comes through just a very direct knowing and a very direct contact, in a very clear way, it's important to filter that information very, very carefully. And it's not being dishonest. It's just, you can't give everything to everybody that comes through, and it's part of this work. It's part of having integrity and ethics. Last night I was in a circle, and the woman next to me, who I've never met before in my life, was 6 weeks pregnant, and man, that soul that's coming through was just chatter all night long. It was actually starting to cause me anxiety. I was trying to tune it out because I didn't really want to hear. The more I was burdened with it, the more I felt anxious and was wanting to tell her, hey, you know, that little 6-week-old baby. It floored me, 6 weeks old, and yet the soul is right there, like hovering constantly on her left side. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, this is somebody that's coming in that has an incredible drive and mission here on this planet. And I really wanted to tell her and encourage her, but I had to do the ethical thing and refrain from that because she doesn't know me and she didn't ask me for that information, and she may not have been ready for that information, and it's not for me to share or give. So I just want to make that clear. When I tell this story about this transgendered soul that I encountered in my work, I want to make it clear that I'm not running around telling everybody about everything that comes through to me. At that point, that baby died, and I'm not sure that information would have been healing or beneficial to the parents of that child. So at that point, sometimes the best thing to really just say is, I encountered your child's soul, and I want you to know that he is in a good place, and he is, happy to have made that transition, and leave it at that. There's nothing else that really needs to be said necessarily. But I'm sharing it because it profoundly affected me and my own belief system. It challenged my belief system, and I just thought it was a very interesting case. I've never had one like that. So my final kind of experience that I've had with transgenderism is we've had 19 foster children come into and go out of our home over the course of years, and almost all of them are grown adults now, many of them with children of their own, and I keep in contact with almost all of them, but 2 in particular we took legal guardianship of. And that was just because of their own legal situations at the time, allowed us to have the right to do that. And because that was the most beneficial thing for them, to provide them the most security and stability. So of those 2 that we took guardianship, one, a teenage female, came into our home a couple different times. She was with us overall for a few years, and we brought her when we moved from California to Texas with us. She, turned 18. We helped her move out, get an apartment, start college, all that kind of stuff. For all intents and purposes, she is my daughter. I have a sense of obligation towards her and when I say obligation, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, I have that tie. I love her. I have that sense of protectiveness, of self-sacrifice, all the things I do for my own children. I have those maternal feelings towards her. But the thing about it is that she's currently in the transition of becoming a man. So this is a little bit of a unique position for me because I am not her biological mother. I didn't spend the majority of her life with her, as her own mother hasn't. But once she turned 18 and went off to college, that didn't end up working out for her, and she went here and went there. And so at this point, I'm still here. I still love her for all intents and purposes. I'm still her mama, even though she has a mama that's alive on this planet. But she will always have that place in my home and in my heart as a child of mine. I wanted to say daughter, see, and this is what's really hard. Because it's, I think when transgendered children and young adults sort of come out and, they have these very strong family bonds, hopefully. I know that's not always the case, but hopefully they do. And their family can either choose to walk that path with them or just cut them off and reject them, unfortunately, and that happens as well. But either way, if the family decides to walk that path with them, then they have that more regular contact and watching that transition. And so it's a gradual sort of processing that occurs. With her, basically, we sent her out being a woman. And now, she's been gone out of our sort of immediate family environment for a year and a half, about 2 years. And now she's wanting to come back to live with some of our close family members here in the area. And so as a family, we've sat down several times and had this discussion about how are we going to do this? How do we feel about this? How is this going to work? Because she, and I keep saying he went out a woman. We sent him out a woman, and he's coming back a man. Totally different name, totally different body type, body image, projection of self. And it's interesting because I've kind of been watching the transition happen through Instagram and Facebook, but not in day to day. And so, with my own child, I would be having regular weekly contact at the least and be more involved in that process and able to process my own concerns, in a mutual relationship. But because we aren't having that type of relationship, it's a very curious, because I'm more than just an outside observer, but I'm not close enough to be walking the daily path. So, in the whole scheme of it, it's not the gender issue that's the hard part. The hard part is that we have this whole history of knowing her by this name, and although in her essence she's still the same person, she's not the same person at all. And so she's a he. And to even call her suddenly by a different name, it feels weird and it feels foreign to us. So as a family, we've sat around several times and said, how are we going to do this? How is this going to work? And particularly my granddaughter's 4. She was about 2, and she was very attached to her, this foster daughter of mine. And so now that she's 4, she does not have a concept at all that we sent her out being this, going by this name, looking like this, being this, and now she's coming back and she's no longer this person. Now she has a man's name. Now she has more of a man body. Now she dresses more like a man. It is confusing. Not a big deal. It's not a big deal. I'm not there's no moral or ethical dilemma in it for me. It's more the emotional and psychological, how to adjust to that and accept that. And especially because he becomes very upset when people refer to him as she, or very defensive and very upset about it. So that also is our concern, because we don't want to be offensive. We don't want to come across like we're not supportive. But by the same token, it is a mutual, there has to be some amount of grace allowed for the people that also have to make the adjustment and the shift as well. And so, yeah, those are my only experiences with transgenderism, transgendered individuals. And it's interesting, just this culture that we live in and how unprepared we really are to deal with these issues as they come up within ourselves for transgendered individuals, or for our family members, for the people that are loving and trying to support transgendered individuals. It's interesting that in indigenous culture, they didn't have this struggle, right? And so it just goes to show how much ego identity is so culture bound. That brings me full circle kind of back around to the shamanic view of transgenderism. I think that that idea of two spirits is very, very shamanically based. It's a very heart-based way to view transgenderism, in my opinion, because in a universal shamanic perspective, The ego and all its projections are not really what we identify with. So, in the eternal state of the soul, there's no male or female, there's no gay, there's no straight, there's no married, there's no single, there's no, there's not even, shaman or healer or any of that. We are actually more than that. So these things, these roles and these labels are part of the ego identity. In post-industrial nuclear culture, the ego identity is very, very rigid around gender roles and gender identity and what that looks like. And that's not really honoring the path of the individual soul, the divine purpose and unique individuality of the divine soul. So I would have to say that our current post-industrial nuclear culture is obviously not shamanic, and it doesn't support a shamanic way of being, and that a shamanic way of being would probably best be supported by the idea of the two spirits, and honoring and revering the people that could embody two spirits, two souls, two gender identities in one incarnation. Indeed makes them marvelous, spectacular, fabulous. So anyway, that's my little talk on transgenderism and shamanism, indigenous Native American culture. And I'm going to put some links in the bottom of the video description where you can read a little bit more in depth about the two-spirited people and their role in indigenous culture. And pass the information on if you know any transgendered individuals or therapists working with transgendered individuals. I think if we can offer a perspective that values transgendered individuals for being the incredibly brave and unique and beautiful people that they are, that the world will just be a better place overall. So thanks for listening. If you guys have comments or questions, always feel free. Otherwise, I will see you around. Love you guys so much. And if you are a transgendered individual and you clicked and watched this, I hope that it gave you some kind of hope. And just know that I'm honored that you're here, that I know how incredibly brave that you are. And I am so, so sorry if life has been harder for you than it should have been, because people don't understand, because you came into a culture that does not support and honor you. I'm sorry for that. And just know that we're out here, those of us that are doing this work, and we're trying to make it a better, safer place for everybody to be in. And I love you. So have a great day, and I will see you guys later.